And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another victorious episode of the Assembly Call, as tonight your Indiana Hoosiers win their opening round matchup in the Big Ten tournament 95-73 over the Iowa Hawkeyes in a game that, frankly, didn't feel that close. This is a game that didn't start out that great for Indiana as the Hoosiers fall down 11-6, a little sloppy on defense, too many turnovers. The Hoosiers played better then in the next stretch in the first half and regained control before giving it back to Iowa with too many turnovers there at the end of the first half. But the second half, after a quick run by Iowa, was all Indiana. And this is the kind of performance that IU fans have been waiting to see all season long. A performance in the second half where the team limits turnovers and is patient and gets good shots and makes good shots, plays solid defense, plays as a team. This is how we've known that Indiana can play all year. We just haven't seen it outside of 1 to 2 minute stretches. And tonight, Indiana really put it together for about 15 minutes there in the second half. And it was as magnificent as these Hoosiers have looked pretty much all season. And we are here to break it all down for you tonight. I am your host, Jared Morris. I will be joined, as I always am, by Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips here on this episode of the Assembly Call IU Postgame Show. And let's begin how we begin every episode, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment. And I want to take you back to the start of the second half because the Hoosiers, again, they led 43-40 at halftime, had played okay, but then Iowa jumps right out and scores the first 4 points of the second half. And everybody's thinking, okay, here we go again. Hoosiers have a lead. They're in control there in the first half. Now Iowa's going to regain control. And what do we always think in the Big Ten tournament, right? Whatever bad can happen will happen. Well, Indiana needed something good to happen to put those thoughts away and to get some more good momentum going in the second half, and they did, because the very next sequence, Thomas Bryant got a block shot. Josh Newkirk got the ball, pushed it, got it to James Blackman Jr. for a three. That put Indiana back ahead, and it was the first of many big plays for James Blackman Jr., who really had one of the best stretches of his Indiana career there over the first 5-6 minutes of the second half. I've got the numbers here. Blackman, in that early part of the second half, had 12 points. He was 3 of 3 from downtown. Plus, it wasn't just scoring, as it often is with James, but he had 2 assists, 2 rebounds, 1 steal, all in that sequence. And he really put Indiana on his back during that stretch. And then it was like everybody else got their confidence, and Indiana was off to the races because they outscored Iowa 9-8 to start the second half, and then 15-6, 11-5, 13-3 to just bludgeon the Hawkeyes in the second half and earn a big 22-point win. That certainly doesn't put them back in the NCAA tournament or anything like that, but it's at least the kind of win that kind of makes you stand up and take notice and say, hey, this team may not be done yet. That's certainly how they played tonight, and it was great to see. And James Blackman Jr. had a big part of that there early in the second half. So tonight's banner moment brought to us by our friends at Hoosier Proud, as it always is, an Indiana-based brand by Hoosiers for Hoosiers. Our friends at Hoosier Proud offer a line of T-shirts and accessories that are unmatched for anyone who wants a unique and stylish way to display their own pride in being a Hoosier. You can do that with Assembly Call gear because our gear is sold by Hoosier Proud, and you can also go to their website and check out all of their really interesting and cool Indiana-based designs. They're all right there for you at HoosierProud.com. And when you use our promo code ASSEMBLY, ASSEMBLY, you receive 15% off your entire order, not just Assembly Call gear, but any gear that they have at Hoosier Proud. So go check out HoosierProud.com, promo code ASSEMBLY today. Alrighty, let's make the extra pass, find the open man, and get some opening thoughts from the rest of our team. We start with Andy Bottoms and his Bottoms line brought to us by Bracketology.fm.
You know, there's a lot of different places to go because so many things went right, which feels weird. We've probably saved up a lot of good comments from these other games where we could hardly think of anything good to say. But I think the defense in the second half was outstanding. I mean, Iowa ends up with 33 points. They scored the last 9, though, when it didn't really matter, and the game was out of reach. And so, you know, for the better part of 20 minutes of basketball, IU gave up 24 points. Iowa had 1 offensive rebound in the second half, and IU out-rebounded them, I think, 19-10 in total in the second half. So closed off possessions. That was an issue in the first half on those 2 free throws in particular. You know, they really limited second chances. They were physical with Peter Jock and really helped to take him out of the game. And I think you give a lot of credit to that. To a guy like Devonte Green, who was really good pressuring the ball. I thought Robert Johnson was excellent on Jock for the majority of the game. and some really big blocks. I think you had 5 blocks in the second half, better help defense, just more active. Guys in stances and doing things like that. And it's obviously fun to watch this team when they are shooting the ball as well as they did in the second half, when they, didn't miss a shot. I think they said for 9 minutes or something like that. But, the difference to me was that they really focused on defense, and you had guys that looked like they cared defensively, which is not a great thing to be saying for one of the first times this season after 30 games. But there was a huge difference tonight. Even Blackman, you saw kind of get into things defensively. And so if this team is going to make a run through the Big Ten tournament, that's going to need to continue. And it's one of those cases though where sometimes you need that break between games. This is a case where let these guys get out there as soon as possible again. They've got a lot of confidence. They shot the ball well, and so if ever there was a time to turn around and have another game the next day, I think this would be it, coming off of this performance for this team. So we just have to make sure, in typical Big Ten tournament fashion, that nothing terrible happens between now and then. I joked with you before we started that the whole team would probably get like food poisoning or something between now and
don't jinx it
in the Wisconsin game. But
hey, Andy, I'm just happy that the previously extinct animal didn't run on the court and eat only the Indiana players, because when you tweeted that, I was like, not out of the question given our Big Ten tournament history.
We've seen crazier things happen.
I rule out nothing.
Hey, how much fun is this? Like, can we just pause for a moment? Like, this is fun, and we haven't had a win like this since Michigan State. Like, it's just fun to see the team play like this and play like they're having fun again. You're muted, Ryan. It's also fun when Ryan's muted.
Well, that's my favorite part of the show, actually.
No, I would say that we haven't had a win like this since Illinois, and we didn't even get to do a show after that one because we were at the game.
That's right.
Yeah, I don't know.
All right, so let's go over now to Ryan and get his rant brought to us by thebiglead.com.
Well, of course, I'm going to talk about the guy who I've been talking about for well over a year now, how great he is and how great he's going to be, because I think he changed the momentum of the game. A guy who over the last 2 weeks looked like he hit the freshman wall at terminal velocity, hadn't scored in 2 games, had 13 total points in the last 4, went out, and it's Deron Davis. If you haven't picked up on who I'm talking about, hit 7 of 7 shots from the field, 15 points, hit his free throw, didn't really rebound much, but didn't really matter because everybody else seemed to be rebounding. Just a complete performance, and a guy who I think as soon as he came in changed the momentum of the game. Early on, Iowa was up. I think it was 11-4 after the first media timeout, and then I think that's right. I'm not sure exactly, but came in, and I just felt like the game changed when he came in there. He played much better defense than we've seen from him lately. He's been moving his feet really slowly over the last few weeks. I think he's just tired from a long stretch of intense games. But he just looked like the best player on the floor for long stretches of that game. And I would echo what Andy said about Devonte Green as well. I mean, I think both those guys came in, set the tone on both ends of the floor, and just took the team to another level. Devonte just played incredibly confident, and I think that Davis did as well. And then you saw Curtis Jones looking as good as he's looked in months. I mean, legitimately in months. Not just because he hit 2 threes, but because he attacked and he looked competent defensively. I don't know if it was the haircut or what, but the guy just looked like a different player. And you
like
could
how you threw that in there so seriously, like it might have actually been.
It might have been. I don't know. I mean, what else was it?
I thought he was in the witness protection program, so maybe he just had to get a different look there for a while to kind of blend in, and now he's
getting hunted by somebody. No, but he just he looked, as soon as he stepped on the court, he looked like a different guy. It wasn't even, you could tell as soon as he walked off the bench that, whoa, Curtis Jones looks like he's involved and he's engaged. And props to Tom Crean for putting him in the game early. I mean, that's a thing where I would have said, why is he even in the game given how he's played recently? But I thought all 3 of those freshmen really contributed and really kept the momentum going. And I think Deron Davis specifically just turned the game around. I thought he was the best player in the game for long stretches. I thought he and Jawan Morgan were the difference makers in the game, really, because of what they gave on both ends of the floor. I also think Robert Johnson coming out and shooting well to start the game was a huge momentum builder. But Deron Davis, I mean, you got a view of what that guy is going to be. I mean, how about the steal and the length of the court drive and
it was his OG impression
and sort of dunk, because you could tell by the end of the run he was a little tired and he just kind of got it. It's barely over the rim, but
he's got an old man's game, but it's a good one.
He does, and you know what? I think if he's not exhausted because he hadn't played so long in a single stretch, which he hasn't done much this year, I think that's easy. That's an easy dunk for him. But it looked like he was like, "Oh God, I'm tired," and he just barely got over the rim. But also, you saw he and Thomas Bryant play for long stretches in that first half and not look like it didn't work. It looked like it could work in those stretches. They missed a couple of assignments. Thomas Bryant missed a couple rolls to the hoop on his guy, but I thought for the most part, they looked like they knew what they were doing, and it looked like a competent tandem, which it hasn't looked like for long stretches of this year. So props to Deron Davis. I thought it was his best game maybe of the season. I think it was his career high, and I just thought that he was a difference maker and a game changer. What we thought he could be before the season.
Yeah, no, there's no question about it. So people are asking me, like I said, so our family game plan, my daughter wore her new little Indiana dress today. It was the first time. And my wife, literally Indiana was like plus 40 while she was sitting on the couch with me tomorrow. Folks, it's not hard. My daughter will be wearing the dress. My wife will be on the couch again tomorrow. Whatever you did, whatever you thought, whatever you said, whatever you wore today, you do it tomorrow. When Indiana wins a Big Ten tournament game going away like this, you don't mess with it. You just keep doing whatever you were doing. Are we all in agreement on this?
Yes.
This is not up for debate.
I'm afraid to leave my house, quite frankly. I'm not even sure.
I'd like NFL free agency to start over again tomorrow, so I can be working like crazy during the game and not paying much attention. You know, everything
again, folks. That is how we do it. Hey, by the way, I do want to make mention. You know, a lot of times when I'm watching the game and there's an odd substitution, I'll make note of it because I want to see how Indiana performs after that substitution. Sometimes they don't work out. Sometimes they do. You know, today it was 20-19. And Indiana came out of the second media timeout with Curtis Jones, Devonte Green, Deron Davis on the floor. And I thought it was a really curious decision to, you know, be in the lead. And then you put all three freshmen out there, especially with, you know, kind of how Curtis has played this year. I thought, okay, this is kind of an iffy choice by Indiana. And they proceeded to go on a 9-0 run right after that with Robert, Devonte, Curtis all hitting threes. So, you know, look, kudos to Tom Crean for the decisions that he made tonight, you know, playing Curtis Jones and giving the freshman run when he did, because he clearly had a good feeling that these guys were going to be ready to play, and they were. And they supplemented some really good play by the starters as well. I mean, it was a complete team effort, but I just wanted to make note of that because we come on here and a lot of times we'll criticize some of those decisions. I think it's important when there's a curious one and it does work out that we make mention of that too. All right, well, we're going to continue breaking down this fun, exciting Indiana game. It's something we haven't been able to say much this year, but we certainly can tonight as Indiana wins 95-73. They actually led there for a decent portion of that second half by about 30 points before Iowa kind of cut into the lead there late with a late run, but just a terrific performance from Indiana. Before we move on and talk more about this game, I do want to take a quick minute and tell you about our other sponsor, SeatGeek. So buying tickets online for sports and concerts has been a confusing process for a long time. It's always been hard to find the best deal for that game or NCAA tournament game that you may want to go to, and none of those older ticket sites want to change that. But SeatGeek is different. They've come along and created an amazing app and website that makes it easier than ever for fans to buy and sell tickets, no matter what you're going to buy or sell tickets for, sports, music, anything. They are the first place I go to look for tickets to a game or concert because everything about SeatGeek is designed to make life easier for sports and music fans. So here's what you do, because listeners of the Assembly Call actually get a $20 rebate on your first ticket purchase. And the way that you get that is by downloading the SeatGeek app. It's free. You can get it on your iPhone or your Android device, or you can do this at the website. But go to the settings tab and click add a promo code and enter the promo code Assembly, ASSEMBLY. SeatGeek will send you $20 after you've made your first ticket purchase. Again, download the SeatGeek app and enter the promo code Assembly today. You are listening to the Assembly Call IU postgame show. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips, enjoying an exuberant postgame show here as Indiana wins 95-73 in the first round of the Big Ten tournament, or their first game of the Big Ten tournament anyway, over Iowa. So, Andy, let me just throw this out to you here. I mean, let's get this out of the way. We know that this win doesn't put Indiana back in, the tournament. It probably doesn't even put them in the first four outline. But I have to think, here's my take on this. Tell me if you agree. Without OG Anunoby, you look at those wins against Kansas and North Carolina, and the committee is going to say, okay, they won those games, but they didn't have OG. How important is a win like this over a potential tournament team by 22, or it's a really good performance late in the season for the committee to analyze what Indiana is now? Will that matter at all?
I mean, it matters, but I think it's one of those where it's easy to get kind of caught up in the moment of this was great. I mean, it's one game out of 30 or 30, however many they've played at this point. So it's one data point, and it's an important one for them, given how they played. I think if they can show the ability to string it together in multiple games, I mean, we've seen this team play good in stretches, this season, but they haven't been able to sustain it and keep it up. So I think if they're able to do that and come out and play well, tomorrow and get a win over Wisconsin, then things start to get a little bit more interesting, and they probably move into that, potentially that first 4 out category there. So it was necessary for sure to get the win, and impressive the way that they did it. But the committee attempts not to kind of overreact to the recency of a really good game, and take into account the times that this team didn't look very good for sure. So, but a positive, and Illinois losing, Iowa losing is helpful to any hopes that they have. The Syracuse situation is going to be interesting to kind of watch over the next couple of days, and better to be still playing at this point and have a chance to improve your status than being there sitting there waiting and hoping, which certainly if IU is doing, there wouldn't be any intrigue about what's going to happen. But there is a chance to overtake people so long as you can find a way to keep playing.
Here's what I want to ask. I'm just going to jump in real quick because we were talking about this today. How does Syracuse have a better resume than Indiana? Like I was looking at that. It doesn't seem like they do.
They don't, but their coach whines louder than anybody else.
Is that really it, Andy? I mean, can you make an argument? I mean, especially now that Indiana won this game, and if they lose to Wisconsin, that's a decent team you lose to. I'm sure it downgrades them, keeps them out. But how could Syracuse get in and Indiana not be in? The comparison of the resumes just doesn't seem to match up for me. I don't know. That's my take on it.
Yeah, the challenge, Syracuse has a number of. They're kind of fighting against history, I think, is the way that I put it on Twitter. So on the one hand, they have the worst RPI. They would be the worst RPI to get an at-large if they stay where they are now. Now, they set the bar for what the worst is last year when they got in with one at 72. They're in the mid 80s right now. They have only 2 road and neutral wins, which is I think, as Jerry Palm wrote, would be the lowest total to get in. It's in the data that he has, which goes back to 1994, and to me that is well outside the realm of what actually is relevant at this point. So they haven't done well there. What they do have is 6 top 50 wins, which the committee kind of rammed down everybody's throat last year, and a few really, really top-end wins, all of which obviously came at home with that kind of road record. So it's a weird case because when you look at teams that have had that many top 50 wins, I've got data back to the last 8 years. There's only one team that's gotten left out that's had at least 6 top 50 wins. So it's kind of it's a weird history type thing to look at. I don't know that theirs is necessarily better, but IU, certainly with the number of losses that they've taken at this point, is problematic. There's some other kind of historical numbers about teams with 14 losses and all that. So it's certainly an interesting case, and it just goes to show how, I'm not going to say it's the weakest bubble, but it is not hard at all to pick apart any of these teams that are right around the cut line.
I have one more question. I know Jared's dying to talk about Thomas Bryant, but we
just had a fun win. We're not going to let Syracuse hijack any more of the show.
Let me ask this, though. When was the last time a team beat 2 of the 4 number 1 seeds and didn't get into the tournament? I mean, is there any history of that ever off the top of your head? That's insane to me.
Yeah, I did look back and see. I don't have this handy by any means, but I did look back and see just how many teams have had. If there are teams that have had 2 top 10 RPI wins that have gotten left out, and there were actually more than I thought there would be. There was a Georgetown team that was well below 500 in the league. They might be a decent comp for IU right now, quite frankly. If I go back and look, they were there. I think maybe one of the BYU teams with Jimmer Fredette or somebody got in. It was one of those. There was a Mountain West team that fell in there. So there have been a few that have done that. I don't know whether it's been 2 number 1 seeds, but just in terms of looking at top end of the RPI.
All right, for more tournament talk, make sure that you check out bracketology.fm. No question, because Andy's doing a great job with that podcast. His bracket updates are coming out every day. So again, check out bracketology.fm because you'll see his bracket, and we'll see, where this can go for Indiana. But let's linger on this game because this was a fun one. We got to spend some time here. Ryan, I know that you need to bolt. maybe you can pop in, pop out later, but you have to bolt right now. Do you have any final thoughts for us here before you leave?
Well, I can talk Thomas Bryant. I know that's what you want to talk about.
Well, and specifically, I want to talk defense because I thought, Thomas was kind of up and down offensively. I think he was only 3 for 8, but 5 block shots. Really, I thought played a pretty strong defensive game.
His timing was outstanding in the post today, of getting his hand up and getting it between the ball and the rim and not getting it on the man. And that's a tough skill for a big man to learn, especially when he's been bigger than everybody his entire life and it, grown up, 5 inches taller than people, he can just reach out and block a shot. But when you're playing guys who are taller, and Iowa has some length, he did a really good job. And he did it right on the first possession of the game, I believe, where he just got up and got his hand between the basket and the ball and rejected the ball. And, didn't go for the body, didn't go for a swipe or anything. He just put his hand in the way of the ball. I mean, it's that simple, and it sounds really simple, but the timing on it is really hard. And he just went right up and got it. And, I thought offensively, he shared the ball really well. He had 3 assists, but I thought he moved the ball really well. I thought he faced double teams much better than he usually does and was much stronger. He stepped through them a few times and passed through them instead of just kicking it out to the guy who gave him the ball. I thought IU struggled at times, particularly in the first half, to get the ball into the post. And you saw a lot of not necessarily turnovers, but deflected passes when they throw it in there. So it was tough for him to get it going, but he ran the floor. He didn't quit, made 5 out of 6 free throws, only had 2 rebounds, which is probably the most shocking stat of the game for me. But other guys stepped up. Blackman had 8, Morgan had 8, Johnson had 6. So it didn't really matter. As long as everybody's rebounding, that's not a glaring problem. But I thought he was active. I thought he was engaged, and I thought he was trying to lead. I thought he was trying to get people organized. He screwed up a couple times defensively, and they highlighted it on the in game a couple times where he missed guys cutting through the lane and didn't step up and help. But for the most part, I thought it was a really nice game from Thomas, one that proved again that a guy with that kind of size, this is why you recruit size. Even if he's not scoring a ton of points, he can affect the game just by being big on defense. I mean, that was the problem with the team 2 years ago. They didn't have that guy who could step up and play defense in the middle and just affect shots. It doesn't even matter if you block him, but every time a guard goes down the lane, he should know he has to shoot over a 6'10" guy who can block his shot. And that kind of influence on a game is what Thomas can have even when he's not having a great offensive night. And I think it was good that he kind of focused on that. He sort of anchored himself defensively. He was around the ball a lot. He and Jawan Morgan both were just in there affecting shots, being active and being engaged defensively. And if they do that, like I said, they don't even have to block shots to make a difference. They can just be there and harass shooters and put it in the back of guys' minds that they have to score over somebody instead of just getting a free path to the rim.
Yeah. Hey, and Ryan, real quick before you leave, some really quality humor in our chat. This is from our buddy Gerb. Jared, in light of the Chargers leaving for LA, using Bolt to Ryan is such an ouch moment.
It's not fair, man. It's not cool.
To be fair,
but it is funny.
Fair, Ryan,
by the way,
that word on his own in the chat saying that he needed to leave. So I feel like that's okay.
By the way, I'm just going to say free agency is open in the NFL. I am open to bids from teams to be a fan. Clearly, the Chargers thing is over. I'm open to bids, so just send them my way if you got ideas or want me to be a part of your fan base, and I'll consider my options and make a decision what's best for my family at some point.
Very nice. Okay, we appreciate that. Are you going to be joining us tomorrow for the show?
I will be on tomorrow.
You can't miss a Wisconsin show.
No, of course
there's just no way.
No, I will be here tomorrow, and I'll be there for the radio show as well. Yeah, I just got a bolt because it's the first day of NFL free agency and work is a little crazy.
Okay, you go. Fun win for the Hoosiers. Yep, we will keep breaking it down here on the Assembly Call. I'm Jared Morris. Andy Bottoms here with me. Andy, Ryan mentioned Jawan Morgan, and I thought it was an interesting game for Jawan because I thought he played really well. He did have 6 turnovers, which is a blemish on his stat line, but he made some beautiful basket cuts. And actually, the early leader in the clubhouse for the banner moment was back in the first half. It was 36-31. And Jawan had just a beautiful basket cut, and Deron Davis found him. It was just a beautiful pass. Jawan ended up getting an and one. He missed the free throw, but it put Indiana up 7. But he did that a couple times. We're just, and that's something we didn't see from Indiana there for a while, and we're starting to see it more now. Guys working the baseline. What Troy Williams and Will Sheehy used to do with such effectiveness in this offense. We're seeing McSwain do it, and we're seeing Jawan do it. And obviously, Jawan is better at finishing when he does it, but it's been really nice to see that element back in Indiana's repertoire again. And, look, I don't think that we can understate how important it is for Indiana to have a healthy Jawan Morgan, because, and we've poo-pooed the injury excuse in a sense, not that it hasn't been important, but just that it hasn't been the only explanation, right? I mean, turnovers and late game execution, all the other problems, but it certainly has been a reason. And I don't think that it's a coincidence that Indiana has won 3 out of their last 4 games when they've gotten some guys healthy, and you've had Jawan Morgan back more like himself, and Blackman is a little bit more recovered. This looks like a fresher, healthier team right now, and especially with Jawan, it's really showing up in his play.
Yeah, I thought he went out early in the second half, and Freddie McSwain came in from, just kind of looking at lineup stuff here, from the 17:22 mark to the 11:38 mark. So roughly 6 minutes of that. And Morgan came out, and he came back in, and he made a couple really big plays right away there. I also remember the play that you mentioned in the first half where, cutting off the ball, he's really the guy on this team that either is most comfortable doing that, is best at doing that, whatever you want to say, but he seems to have the best knack for when and where to cut, and hopefully that becomes contagious as other guys try to work through that. But I thought he came in, then he had a couple really big defensive plays where I think he grabbed an offensive rebound, then had one of those blocks, had another block where he just basically snatched the ball out of the guy's hand underneath the basket, and really you start to see a little bit of that athleticism. Guarded Peter Jock a few times, and while didn't always fare well in doing so, I thought he, just the willingness to really try to get up into him showed that he was, confident in his ability to move laterally, which had been a big problem for him as he moved forward. So yeah, I think, for a team that doesn't have OG Anunoby, we look to, can Jawan Morgan step up and start to play a bigger role when he went down? The injuries have prevented that to a certain extent, but I think he's shown these last handful of games just how important he can be. And just to, circle back on Thomas Bryant for a minute, I certainly thought, running the floor, he was a guy both on offense and defense. There was a play, I think the beginning of the second half, IU didn't balance the floor very well, and he was sprinting back and tried to make a play. Didn't make it, but just from a hustle standpoint, played really well. Had a number of other big hustle plays, and there were times that they missed him getting down the court, but he was really active and did a terrific job of running the floor throughout the game, and got himself some easy baskets as a result. And as far as the rebounding goes, guards had 24 of IU's 38 rebounds between the 5 guards that played, which, we've heard Tom Crean talk about guard rebounding a lot, and that's why you see a guy like Morgan maybe doesn't have, or a guy like Bryant may not have as many. I thought he did a good job, and really got Tyler Cook into foul trouble, who had given him and IU in general a lot of trouble in that first matchup. And so when they went into him, they were able to get him into foul trouble. So even if that didn't result in points right away, it took a key weapon off the floor for Iowa. So I thought a really good all-around game from Bryant for sure.
Someone else I want to talk about is Josh Newkirk, who I thought had an interesting game. He got in really early foul trouble, picked up 2 fouls early, and when he left is basically when Indiana started to play better in the first half. And I'm not saying that was necessarily the reason why, but the two things coincided. And he picked up another foul relatively early in the second half and had to leave again too. And there's a play that he made before that, though, that I want to point out because it's one of those little things, but I thought it set the tone. So if you remember back early in the first half, and this comes after the play where Bryant got the block, and then Newkirk got the ball, pushed it up, and got it to Blackman for the 3 that I mentioned as the banner moment. But a possession or two later, there was a rebound that Newkirk got, and it was a really tough rebound where he basically got knocked to the floor by 2 Iowa guys, but grabbed the rebound in between them, and it led to a transition bucket for Bryant. And this, again, is right after Iowa had regained momentum to start the second half, and Indiana was grabbing it back. And I thought the toughness that Newkirk showed and just his willingness to get down and dirty and get that rebound, it was indicative of the mentality that Indiana had coming out in the second half. And it was really nice to see. One of those things that's easy to miss, but I thought was a really important play. And the kind of things that sometimes Josh does that go unnoticed, and especially can go unnoticed when he's maybe having a poor shooting night or turning the ball over a little bit too much. But he's made tough plays for Indiana all season long. Well, I've got a note on my stat sheet, or on my note sheet, because I, had remembered the run Indiana went on when he went out in the first half, and it was 67-54 when he came back in. So he went out. Indiana went on another run in the second half. He comes back in, and I've got a note, do we give up the lead again? And to Newkirk's credit, absolutely not. And he actually hit 2 threes in about the next 2-3 minutes that really pushed the lead out, because you had Devonte Green with those 2 straight possessions where he hit that tough runner in the lane and then hit the dribble off or the three off a dribble. That put Indiana up 18, and then Newkirk drained a couple of threes after that, and that was where Indiana just blew the game wide open. And you can say that those buckets, weren't as big because Indiana was already up 13. But you, I, and every other Indiana fan knows that even when it was 67-54, you were sitting there wondering, all right, how is Indiana going to blow this? What kind of craziness does the Big Ten tournament have in store for us right now? So for Indiana to push that up to 20-25, where even the Big Ten tournament couldn't screw us enough to give up the lead, that was really important. And I thought Josh's willingness to step up and hit those threes after he hadn't done much prior to that, those are really important plays.
Yeah, the first one was a no yes for my couch, because he it wasn't that it was a bad shot, but Iowa had just hit a three right before that, I think, and he stepped into one on the break a little bit further out, and I'm thinking to myself, it wasn't a good shot, it went in. The second one was off a really good drive and kick from Blackman, and so I just thought he made some really good plays. Even late in the game, really realized that he could take Bohannon when he was on him, and did a nice job of driving under control. And doing things there. And then you kind of talked about hustle plays. There was one after IU, maybe it was around the peak of the lead, a ball in the corner toward the Iowa bench, and he goes diving after it even up that much. And, they kind of cut him from on the camera and just had a big smile on his face. And I think was indicative of, one, the effort and intensity those guys played with, but also the fact that they were, for one of the first times in quite a while, seemed to be having fun while they were doing it.
Yeah, no question about it. All right, so we want to talk a little bit more about James Blackman Jr. Because his performance definitely warrants it. We also need to talk a little bit more Robert Johnson, Andy, because I think you had to be pretty proud of what he did. But specifically with Blackman, I've got a memory that I want to harken back to, and it's not going to be a real pleasant one, but I think it's important to bring some context to what we saw today. So that is coming up on the Assembly Call. First, I do want to take a quick minute and tell you why you should activate your free Assembly Call membership. Here are 3 quick reasons. Number 1, it's quick and easy, and if you do it today, it guarantees that Indiana will win the Big Ten tournament. I don't know how. I'm just telling you it does, so you might want to sign up because we're all in this together. Assemblycall.com/join. It takes you 15 seconds, and it guarantees Indiana wins the Big Ten tournament. What more compelling reasons could you need than that? But it's also how you get our best content, because by joining, you'll receive our weekly 6-banner Saturday IU Hoops News Roundup, as well as our detailed post-game analysis emails. And number 3, it's how you connect with us in the Assembly Call community, because only members can access our moderated post-game live chat going on right now over at assemblycall.com/live. I highly recommend you join that, as well as our discussion forum. So if you like what you hear on the Assembly Call, especially right now after Ryan has to bolt early, and it's okay, you can tell us that you like the show better right now. It's quite all right. Becoming a member is the next logical step. Join us for free at assemblycall.com/join. All right, you are listening to the Assembly Call IU postgame show. I'm Jared Morris here celebrating Indiana's 20-plus point victory over the Iowa Hawkeyes in the Big Ten tournament with Andy Bottoms. And Andy, let's linger for a little bit on James Blackman Jr.'s performance, and let's linger on the positive before I bring up a memory that is not going to be so positive. But, I mentioned what he did at the start of the second half, really giving Indiana the momentum boost that they needed. The stat line is just sterling. 23 points, 4 assists, 8 rebounds, a steal, only 1 turnover, was 4 of 5 from downtown, 7 of 9. Sometimes James scores 23 points, but it takes him 15, 16, 17 shots. He was efficient. He was unselfish. This is James Blackman Jr. at his best. And, it's so great to see him playing like this, because this is the kind of basketball that he's capable of.
Yeah, to me, some of the passes he made, he ended up being leading or being tied for the team lead in points, rebounds, and assists. So that's always the makings of a pretty good night. But I just thought he really made some nice and timely passes. And I'm not going to sit here and say there weren't a couple times when he hunted shots. And I think Doc had even referred to it in the game, like he just needed to get a shot up. But I really thought, I mentioned the play to Newkirk, the kick out. He made some nice passes on the break. And I thought, by and large, did not make selfish plays, which I think if there's things that we can look back on the season and get frustrated with him about, it's making plays that just seem selfish at the time. And I didn't see that tonight. I thought he was, a willing passer, a somewhat willing defender, and he got some tough rebounds as well, as you talked about with Newkirk. And so, when he's really mixing it up there, he's a really tough player to beat when he's that engaged in all aspects of the game and not just focused on being a scorer, which we all know that he can do. So hopefully that's something that he can carry forward into this next game, because this was I thought one of the one of the best all-around games he's played. Maybe not the most spectacular game that might come to the Kansas game at the beginning of the year, but just from an all-around standpoint, I thought it was one of his better efforts that I can recall.
And I'll tell you, one of the other games that you put in the annals of James Blackman Jr.'s best games as a Hoosier actually came in his freshman year, first game of the Big Ten tournament, when Indiana went out and beat Northwestern, demolished them. Indiana won 71-56, really played well. And James was magnificent that night. He had 25 points. He had 6 rebounds, 7 assists. And I distinctly recall us coming on the postgame show and talking about his defense, because for whatever reason, he just came out that night and was defending like a madman. And he might have been guarding Trey Demps, because I know Demps, only had 4 points that game, and Demps was a guy who had just killed Indiana so often. And it was one of those.
Any Northwestern game over the past 8 years probably featured Trey Demps, because that's how long he was there. So that sounds about right.
Even this year's game, somehow I think he scored 10 points.
I felt like he snuck onto the floor for a minute.
Yeah. But it was such a great game from James, and it was one of those where you're like, hey, maybe the light bulb's on. Maybe he's ready to kind of turn this around, play great both ways. Now, what happened the next game is Indiana played Maryland, and to be fair, that was a great Maryland team. They were 27-5 that year, a really, really good team. And Indiana played them tough, 75-69, and Indiana probably wins if they get anything from James Blackman Jr., who, on the heels of that 25-point effort, had only 6 points, was 2 of 12 from the field, and was really just almost looked like a totally different guy. You didn't see the same defense. And so I bring that up. Look, we're all excited about this. We're going to celebrate this all night. And so I don't mean to splash cold water on it, but it is important to remember the context. And the context is this. Indiana has struggled to put back-to-back games together in the Big Ten tournament. They've certainly struggled to do it this year. And Big Ten tournament history obviously doesn't matter nearly as much as this year's team. And that's been the issue this year, is doing it consistently. And especially for a guy like James, coming out and playing with this just tremendous mentality today, can he carry it into tomorrow? Because if he does, Indiana's going to have a really good chance to beat Wisconsin. But if he doesn't, in a lot of ways, this Indiana team kind of follows his lead. I mean, think about Indiana's 2 best performances in Big Ten play. What immediately comes to mind? Today and Michigan State, right? And what were the 2 keys to those games? I mean, James Blackman Jr. was outstanding. So Indiana needs him to be like he was today, tomorrow, and hopefully he can carry that momentum into that game tomorrow. I mean, don't you think that that's going to be one of the most important keys for whether Indiana can win that game?
Yeah, I mean, he has to. Wisconsin's going to try to take things away that IU wants to do, and when you get into a slower paced game, which it likely will be, in situations where you're going to have late in the shot clock possessions, he's the guy that's going to probably end up with the ball in his hands. And can he create plays for himself or for his teammates, as he did a good job of doing tonight?
All right, so here's something interesting. Let me get your thoughts on this. And we're going to break down more, about Indiana's NCAA tournament chances. How realistic are they, given this win and given some of the other things that have happened. We'll talk about that more on tomorrow's radio show. But I do want to ask you this, because I just looked at KenPom. Indiana's up to 38. They entered the Ohio State game at 49th, and after those 2 victories have moved all the way up to 38th. So clearly KenPom just looking for any excuse to raise Indiana in the rankings. How much does that matter?
It's hard to tell. So how's that for an answer? It's I think we've seen the committee has talked about using those things more, but there's not really been any clarity on exactly how. You can point to Wichita State last year and the fact that they got in as a nod to KenPom, although they had some injury concerns and some other kind of weird factors that I think people were trying to use that same argument with Wichita State this year, who they didn't have the same injury questions and guys missing from key games as they did a year ago. But as you look at this year, I think they use it, but I don't know that it's a defining factor. Certainly not in the 30s. If they were up in the teens, then it's probably a different argument. But they've talked about wanting to use more of those going forward. They've had, Pomeroy himself and others in to kind of talk about how they might be able to redo some of these metrics like the RPI and things like that. But there hasn't been any real clear direction. None of that has formally changed this year by any means. And so it's helpful. But I don't think a thing that, elevates them a few spots on the seed list or anything like that.
Let's talk about your boy, Robert Johnson, who I thought was going to be one of the big keys to this game. He was great against Iowa the first time. He was obviously tremendous against Ohio State. And it's been so important for him to play well when Indiana plays well. And when you saw the way the game started, I don't think you could say anything but when he airballed that 1-2 pointer, where it's almost like he decided midair not to shoot it, then decided to shoot it. So he just like awkwardly pushed it toward the basket and it airballed. And then he was short on his 2 free throws, which for a guy who has struggled with confidence at times shooting, that's about the worst thing that you can see. But again, to his credit, I thought he was really effectively aggressive driving the ball. And we've talked about how he is not well suited to play a point guard role for Indiana because he's not always comfortable pushing the pace. But I thought he did a pretty good job of it today, picking his spots to drive, picking his spots to penetrate, and then he found a couple of open looks. And when Indiana went on that run in the middle of the first half, he knocked a couple of those down. And, again, I thought that was important just to kind of lift that lid on the basket. This program hasn't always shot well on neutral courts, and to see some of those early shots go down was really big. So not a game that jumps out on the stat sheet, only 8 points, but 4 assists, 6 boards, did have the 4 turnovers, but I also thought he played better than his numbers tonight, and I thought especially early on, those shots that he made were important.
Yeah, I was right there with you just in terms of seeing him miss those couple shots and the way that he missed them and in the free throws. It was concerning because, he'd been so streaky and you kind of felt like maybe that Ohio State game would break him out of it. And then to see him start out the way that he did, like, well, maybe not so much. But I think it was good to see. And I think the thing that he really seemed to focus on in the second half, he only took 1 shot in the second half, really seemed to be more focused defensively on how he could slow down and kind of be more physical with Peter Jock. And I know Doc had mentioned on the broadcast that seemed to really bother Jock over the course of the game. And he kind of got frustrated and being able to take him out of the game to a certain extent was really big. So I think, the first half making those shots was a really big contribution, but I think his defense in the second half was just as, if not more important, as IU kind of broke the game open. And so another good performance for him and hopefully something he's able to build on, because he's a guy who, we talked about this so much that early in the season, he was the most consistent guy. The one you could count on, might not be spectacular, but he was going to be solid every game. Really got away from that. And hopefully, I think we've thought this before in some of these other games where it seemed like maybe he's going to break out of it. But this is 2 straight solid games for him. Shot the ball well. And certainly a guy they're going to need again tomorrow against Wisconsin.
From a numbers perspective, just looking at some of the numbers that jump out, obviously Indiana scoring 1.24 points per possession is really good, and holding Iowa to just 1 point per possession is outstanding. You look at the turnovers, 22%, and that's not good. I mean, that's, around where Indiana's been all season. But for that stretch in the second half when they were playing really well, and in the first half when they were playing really well, they didn't turn it over. And so I think, Indiana's the Hoosiers will have to do a better job than that against Wisconsin. But it was at least nice to see in stretches, even if the overall number for the game isn't that impressive. This was an interesting game from the standpoint of rebounding because both teams really held their own on their own defensive glass. Neither team got much from an offensive rebounding perspective. Indiana, usually a team that's up in the 36, 37% range. They only got 6 offensive rebounds. And again, usually they're able to do much more than that. But I thought the most important stat, obviously 12 for 20 from 3-point range. That's always going to be huge. I mean, there's just, there's really no substitute for that. But Indiana getting 19 free throws to only 10 for Iowa. And poor Iowa, I mean, they got so used to getting 40-plus free throws against us. They didn't tonight, and Fran McCaffrey had to get a technical foul to make his opinion known. And we were all weeping for you, Fran. I mean, really. But look, obviously a part of that is Iowa's not playing at home, because I think we all remember that game for some of the questionable foul calls. But more than that, it's the fact that Indiana was aggressive, got inside. They forced Iowa to foul them. They drew some fouls, and Indiana did a much better job of just being in the right spot. Someone asked us in our Q&A earlier this week, why does Indiana foul so much? And part of it defensively is just being, a half step slow mentally and a quarter step slow sometimes physically. And that gets you out of position. You're there a half step late. You're off balance. You're going to commit more fouls. And I thought today Indiana was in better position and was able to defend better without fouling. And that's huge for this team, because this team can compensate for a bad turnover night, and with some other things not going their way when they're not giving up, 10-15 for a 10-15 free throw advantage going the other way. So if Indiana's going to make any kind of run in this tournament or any tournament thereafter, they don't need to hold a team to 10 free throws. I mean, that's pretty remarkable. But at least playing other teams even at a minimum is really going to be important. And tonight, Indiana really dominated that category.
Yeah, I think it just speaks to the defensive effort that we talked about, and just the intensity and the attention to what was going on. I think there were a number of scenarios where the help defense was a lot better than it had been, and they were able to create turnovers or block shots off of help side defense, which is not something we've seen very often at all from this team. And so just having guys be where they need to be off the ball. I was worried it was going to turn into the same thing when Jock drew a few fouls early in the game, and I was like, here we go again. This guy's going to be parading to the foul line. But thought they did a good job of playing defense without fouling. And I think at a certain point, I would just kind of start chucking up threes and things like that. One of the other things statistically, and you touched on this briefly, was about how IU got the ball inside the way they wanted. IU scored 46 points in the paint.
Wow.
36 points on three-pointers, and the other 13 from the line. There wasn't 1 point scored that wasn't in the paint, beyond the three-point line, or at the free throw line, which quite honestly, in the way basketball is played these days, and the way IU wants to play, is exactly what you want to do. Focus on, high-quality shots, focus on three-pointers if you're not getting the ball to the basket, and figure out how you can get to the line. So certainly, I think IU's done this, maybe a time or two where they had, 2 points that were on a mid-range jumper, but this is probably this year the first time that's really worked out. And I think it speaks well to what they were able to do. And 35 bench points is really big against an Iowa team that's pretty deep. Their bench was key in that first game when McCaffrey benched everybody and really got a lot out of his bench. IU doubled him up on bench points, 35-17, so a little bit better than doubled him up. And all the freshmen had key contributions. Ryan touched on that, where those guys really set the tone in the first half, and then the veterans carried it home in the second.
Hey, let's you mentioned that. Let's take a moment to tip our caps to the coaching staff, who I thought obviously had Indiana ready to play. I thought Tom Crean, the moves that he made, just like Fran McCaffrey made some good moves with his bench in that first game that really helped. Tom Crean did it today. And, I questioned some of them, like when he put Freddie McSwain in early in the second half and not Curtis Jones after Curtis had played well. I'm thinking, okay, why is Freddie in there? And Freddie coming in coincided with Indiana's big run, and he played some good defense and did some good things. And, I think one of the frustrating parts about this season, and one of the reasons why Coach Crean has gotten so much criticism, is it just seems like there has been a big gap between what he's been saying and wanting the players to do and what they're actually doing. But what you just mentioned about the points, points in the paint, three-pointers and free throws, nothing on long twos, any of that. It shows how good the shot selection was and how well this team played to their game plan, minus some of the turnovers. But, you're going to live with some turnovers with the way Indiana plays offense. But I just thought this was a well-coached game overall for Indiana. And look, if we've learned anything in the 6 years that we have been doing the show, as soon as things feel like they're at their darkest, there's always something bright right around the corner. And as soon as things seem like they're at their best, some horrible event is going to happen, some bad loss. And, right now, Indiana reached kind of that low point in their season late in February, but they found a way to beat Northwestern. They went on the road and beat Ohio State, and now they won this game to win 3 out of 4 and kind of yanked themselves back from what was starting to look like it was going to be an abyss. And I don't know if it'll lead to an NCAA tournament berth, but and I'm not saying it changes my mind at all about what I think for the future of the program, but I do think it warrants some mention and a hat tip, because this season could have really gotten away. And it's been nice to see the team bounce back and keep fighting here late and playing some of their best basketball here in early March.
Yeah, one of the things you see in watching some of these conference tournaments is teams that are out of it just fold. And I think you saw that a little bit yesterday with Ohio State to a certain extent. They really didn't have a ton to maybe had a very, very outside chance at getting in, and they end up going out and getting beat by Rutgers, who has definitely played better of late. You saw Illinois today get down to Michigan and just kind of fade away. And you've certainly seen this in other conference tournaments as they've gone. And so I think it is, to your point, testament to these kids to do that. And I think, you look and you say, they've got nothing to lose in this tournament. There's no pressure on them. We've talked about how in some ways that's when Crean's teams have played their best. When you get to a point where little is expected and guys really bounce back. But I thought the point you made about the substitutions were interesting, because I think I had some of the same questions that you did. I know, Doc had mentioned that Curtis Jones had been playing really well in practice, and was good to see, because he was another guy. We talked about Robert Johnson a little bit. Curtis Jones just looked lost in some of these games. And so for him to come out and, the Kansas version of Curtis Jones made a return for the night. And even the Michigan State version, where I thought he played well in that game. And so I thought he did really well. And then, the McSwain thing, I was like, this guy didn't play at all in the first half. Why are you bringing him in here? And they were plus 12 in those like 6 minutes that he was on the floor. So while it's easy to criticize, sometimes these guys probably do actually know more than we do.
Yes, most of the time that is the case. There's no
Most of the
question
time.
about it.
Most
Yes.
of the time. We got to give credit every now and again.
Yes, we do. And the thing on Jones, he is an overlooked important piece for this team. Because you mentioned the Michigan State game. Think about some of the games Indiana's played their best. They've gotten contributions from Curtis. Because when he can come in and provide you with 6 points, look, a lot of people thought this was going to be a close game, a 3, 4, 5-point game. That can be the difference between winning and losing. When Indiana was up by 3 at halftime, they were ahead because Curtis Jones gave them 6 points. And normally Curtis has come in, kind of run around, not looking like he's known what he's supposed to be doing, and hasn't given Indiana much. And if we had gotten normal Curtis Jones tonight, Iowa's maybe up by a point or two at halftime. And that's important. And sometimes if you're going to make a run like this in the tournament, you're going to need 8, 9, 10 guys on your bench who can play, give you some positive contributions. Curtis did that tonight. Freddie McSwain did that tonight. Zach McRoberts, for his part, came in and made a couple nice hustle plays tonight. That's what it will take for Indiana, not just to win tonight, but to have a good performance tomorrow, possibly win that, and then who knows what can happen in the weekend. We don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but I think it's important. I mean, Indiana's biggest wins, Curtis Jones has done some good things. I don't think that's a coincidence, and hopefully, haircut and all, he can come back tomorrow and have a similar performance. Let's break down Wisconsin next after the break. You want to do that?
Yeah, we should talk. We should hit Devonte Green too when we come back. He's one we haven't talked about a lot. I thought he played really well.
Okay, so let's talk about Devonte Green, and then we'll look ahead to IU, Wisconsin, and continue pinching ourselves that Indiana played this well in the Big Ten tournament. That's coming up next on the Assembly Call. And hey, our last call, which is going to be coming up after we make those points, is brought to you by our friends at Yogi's Bar and Grill in Bloomington. And as I mentioned on Twitter earlier today, go into Yogi's to watch the IU games, and you get 10% off your food bill. Just let them know that the Assembly Call sent you. Watch the game, get 10% off, and then hang around afterwards and watch the Assembly Call IU postgame show because it's there on video. You can hear the audio, and we'd love to have you watch us there from Yogi. So, again, you get 10% off your food during the game. Let them know that the Assembly Call sent you. Yogi's is the place to go to watch the games. All right, last call, Devonte Green talk and IU Wisconsin talk coming up next. Stick with us. All right, you are listening to the Assembly Call IU postgame show. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms, breaking down Indiana's 95-73 victory over the Iowa Hawkeyes today in the Big Ten tournament. Let's talk a little more Devonte Green, Andy. I mentioned the awesome 2-possession stretch that he had in the second half where he hit that really tough runner in the lane where he absorbed some contact, made the shot. Then he had, the beautiful crossover dribble, step back 3-pointer. I was a little bit disappointed that Indiana didn't give him a shot at the end of the first half because we've seen how good he's been at the end of first halves, but that's okay. But another solid effort from him, and it wasn't just the scoring. I thought rebounding-wise, he did a really nice job too. 5 rebounds, and defensively was good. And someone asked me before the game, how does Indiana guard, a guy like Peter Jock? And I said, well, maybe you put, Devonte Green on him for a few possessions, with the point being he's just a tough defender. And what he maybe lacks in height, he will make up for in grit and toughness and just, and quickness as well. And I thought we saw a little bit of all of that today from Devonte.
Yeah, I thought there was a hustle play he made in the first half where everybody was just kind of waiting on the ball to go out of bounds. He went, ran it down, saved it over his head, and was able to, I think, led to a basket for IU just by making effort plays, which I think is what you want from these freshmen. I think that's why they energized everybody so much. Durant Davis came in immediately, scored a few baskets. Devonte makes a hustle play. Curtis Jones, knocked down a 3 and did some nice things as well. And so, I really think he's a guy who's a potential tone setter defensively. And then, as you said, in the second half, made those couple key baskets, did a really nice job on that drive of, really being under control, tried to initiate and draw some contact, but was still able to stay on balance and bank that shot in. There was another one that was just kind of a more wild shot that managed to bank its way in. And then that 3-pointer that you mentioned, I thought he played and has continued to play really well and to play really under control, which is something that this team has lacked. Guys who could really, make plays, but not get out of control. And so he had, only had 1 assist, but just had 1 turnover tonight, and was in 20 minutes was plus 15 on the floor and scored 10 points and grabbed 5 rebounds. So that's pretty efficient for 20 minutes of action. I think, again, as you just mentioned, if IU is going to continue to win games in this tournament, they're going to need quality performances from everybody up and down the roster. And I think he's a guy you've started to feel more and more as the season went on that you could really trust. And on a team where we've, lamented not being able to know who you could expect what from on a night in, night out basis. I think he's turned into a guy where I think you do really have a good handle on what you're going to get from him when he comes onto the floor.
So let's talk about Wisconsin. That is who Indiana plays tomorrow. I believe it's the third game, right? Same tip, 6:30 Eastern time.
I think it's right about the same time, if not exactly the same time.
Yep. So look, we know Tom Crean's record against Wisconsin. It's terrible. We know how much Wisconsin has dominated Indiana. So it's usually very hard to make a legitimate case for why Indiana can beat Wisconsin, especially when the game isn't at home. But when you look at it right now, and you consider the fact that the last time Indiana played Wisconsin at Wisconsin, think back to the timing of that game. Everybody thought Indiana was going to get their doors blown off, and the Hoosiers went up there. They only lost by 5. They played pretty well. They were in that game, just couldn't quite execute enough late to get over the hump. And so Indiana loses that game by 5. One game later, Wisconsin beats Nebraska. They're 21-3, 10-1 in the conference, and they are absolutely rolling and looking as good, playing as well, as a Wisconsin team has in a while, at least in terms of the wins. But there were some signs, actually, even at that time, that things were starting to wobble a little bit. Rutgers took them to overtime. They needed overtime to beat Nebraska. And so since that point, when they were 21-3, Wisconsin's only 2-5. And they haven't won a game away from the Kohl Center since that overtime win over Nebraska. And so, look, they maybe they got themselves right a little bit with that 17-point win over Minnesota to end the regular season. But this is not a Wisconsin team that's hitting on all cylinders. And Indiana seems to be, peaking in a sense at the right time. So you got one team going up, one team going down a little bit, and hey, Wisconsin is 333rd in the country in free throw percentage at 64.4%. And that's one of the things Indiana does the worst is put teams on the free throw line. So maybe Wisconsin in a close game won't be able to take advantage quite as much. Point being, this does not, to me, feel like one of those Wisconsin games where Indiana's got to go play perfect and they've got to stub their toe. Like, I feel like Indiana and Wisconsin, the records don't show it, and their resumes are clearly quite different. But I feel like the two teams that will be coming on the court tomorrow, how they're playing, are actually pretty close. And I like Indiana's chances to play well. And if they can execute down the stretch, I think Indiana should have a good chance to get another win in the Big Ten tournament. Am I crazy?
Well, I mean, no, I don't guess so. I mean, if that Rob Wilson guy who had 30 points in 1 year strolls on the court, I'm just shutting the game off and I won't be on the postgame show. So if that happens, all bets are off. But
by the way, a little more confidence when I ask you if I'm crazy.
Okay.
I mean,
I mean, there hasn't been one, no matter what the record is. I don't think there's been one IU Wisconsin game that you haven't talked yourself into. So I just,
it's what I do, man.
At this point, I'm kind of numb to it. I can't really. I don't know
okay, but this time it's.
I don't know what reaction you want from me, but I think I think the keys for me are can Bryant and Davis play well together again? Because I think Davis certainly gave Ethan Happ some trouble in the game at IU. And I think is a matchup that really puts pressure on him to be able to do something. Now, the flip side of that is they have to find a way to defend Happ without getting called for fouls. The fact that this game will not be played at the Kohl Center certainly helps that a little bit. But so I think IU does have, if they can play Bryant and Davis together in stretches, have the ability to give them some trouble. And it just becomes a matter at that point of, can guys really step up and continue the defensive intensity that they need to, slow down Nigel Hayes if they start running offense through him to, keep on Bronson Koenig. And that's where, Newkirk not getting into foul trouble, having, Devonte Green be able to give minutes off the bench, it becomes really key in terms of putting pressure on the ball and those kinds of things. Because odds are Robert Johnson may end up being the guy who tries to guard Nigel Hayes, depending on what they want to do defensively. So, but I agree. I mean, Wisconsin has not looked the same to me. They've been sloppy at times, which is not something that you would consider for them. And they've given up a lot of points, quite frankly. Their defense hasn't been great. In those games, losing to Ohio State, they gave up 83 points in just a 62 possession game. They gave up 84 points to Michigan State on the road, and lost to Iowa at home in a game that was, they really kind of gave away at the end, but allowed Iowa to hang around. And Iowa, as we saw tonight, not a particularly good defensive team, but Iowa was really able to limit them on that end. So, I do think there are reasons to feel more confident than the numbers would probably indicate, just given that Wisconsin really has not played particularly well down the stretch, even, really dating back to when they played really, you can keep going back. I mean, Rutgers really had them on the ropes, ended up having to go to overtime, didn't really feel like they played all that well against IU in the second matchup at the Kohl Center. Had to go to overtime to beat Nebraska, and that you mentioned in that stretch of games. After that, as you discussed, they certainly, based on the pace that they play, are not a team that's going to go kind of run away and hide. In theory, from a shooting standpoint and from a scoring standpoint. So I think it can be a close game and a chance for IU to show that they'll be able to execute down the stretch as they did in the Northwestern game.
Yeah, and even as I've talked myself into confidence, I'll still have nightmares about Bronson Koenig tonight because this always seems to be the time of year when he steps up and hits big shots. So,
yeah, absolutely. But I think, I think there are things that we've seen from IU tonight, hopefully defensively, that they can carry that forward. And there's something to be said for getting a little momentum in these games where, you see that with the team that's played the night before, the fatigue really starts to catch up with you. Games 3, games 4. But playing just in the second night of a back-to-back, I think you're able to see in some of these conference tournaments where guys are able to build confidence and carry that forward a game versus the other team who's playing their first game is, might be a little bit sluggish. So hopefully that helps IU as well get off to a good start.
Look, and if all else fails, just get up by 30 points late in the second half, like Indiana was. They led 91-62, so by 29 at the under 4-minute timeout. And I was kind of, laughing to myself. I was like, okay, what's the Big Ten tournament going to do now? Institute a 30-point shot for the final 3 minutes of this game? Because if things can go wrong in the Big Ten tournament, they do. But when you're up by 25 late, you're pretty safe. Luke Recker, Blake Hoffarber, and Cam Chapman can't make a shot to beat you. And I apologize for mentioning all of those names.
Although 30-point leads,
celebrating.
Although, as you mentioned, 30-point leads. Apparently, Northwestern is currently on a 31-0 run against Rutgers. So I don't know over what time period that run has taken place, but apparently that can be erased if given enough time and the right situation.
So the resurgence of Rutgers basketball has been greatly overstated, is what you're saying.
Well, it was over 10 minutes, 31-0 run in the last 10:39. That seems bad. It was 37-9 during in one of the shots that I'm just seeing on Twitter. So
okay, all righty. Well, what a fun night for Indiana. Again, the Hoosiers win by, what was it, 22 points, 23 points? Hoosiers win by 22 points. Just a really good performance in a season that has been devoid of them. And it was fun to watch Indiana play. The Hoosiers looked like they were having fun. Look, I think a lot of us just we always look at the Big Ten tournament as just, this nothingness, this wasteland at the end of the Big Ten season in between the NCAA tournament. At some point, Indiana is going to make a run in this tournament, even if it's just blind luck and the law of averages. So maybe it can be this year when Indiana really, really, really needs it to get themselves back into NCAA tournament consideration or just to get the automatic bid. So it's only one game out of the 4 they would need to do that, but you've got to at least take that first step, and Indiana took it tonight. Let's go to our last call brought to us by Yogi's. Some final comments on this game before we wrap up, get some rest, because we've got a lot of Indiana basketball content to create tomorrow, Andy, so we need to be well rested.
True. I've got a bracket to blow up and put back together again too. So
how do you function in March? Like, seriously.
It's not great. I'm pretty much just trying to consume all of caffeine in a 30-mile radius from here and then just see what happens from there.
Yeah, you got bracketology. We're doing the radio show tomorrow at like noon. And then you got a post-game show tomorrow night. I mean, that's a heck of a schedule.
Good times abound.
Good times.
Now, like I said, it just a lot of positives to take away from this game for IU. When even in some of the other, Ryan and I talked about this after the Ohio State game. Yeah, they had played well. The starters played great, but the bench didn't do very much, and the defense was terrible. And there were other reasons to not feel great about it. And I'm not going to say that the game tonight was perfect by any means, but nice to walk away from the game feeling good about a lot of different aspects of the team. And again, if you're going to make a run, you need to be able to rely on not just one thing and not just one guy, but a whole bunch of them. And I thought tonight at least was a window into, this team being able to do a lot of things well in a way that we just haven't seen very often this year. And on the one hand, it kind of makes you want to be pissed off about it because you're like, where has this been? On the other, I think we've seen enough this season to just feel like, let's just enjoy it, move on to tomorrow, hope that it can continue and go forward from there. So, if ever this team was going to exercise demons in the Big Ten tournament, what better way to do it than against Wisconsin, who has haunted our dreams for years, it feels like. So maybe it's one of those things where everything just kind of comes together in the right way and you can conquer a lot of things at once. So with that as backdrop, let's hope for another solid performance from IU tomorrow. And after that, we'll just see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, look, this has been a season, certainly in January and February, that has been pretty much devoid of hope. And the irony, of course, is how much hope and optimism there was at the beginning of the year. So I suppose it is fitting that now here we sit on March 9th. And, Indiana's 18-14. This one win doesn't erase all the bad losses. And Indiana's still in bad position for the NCAA tournament. And it's still, on the whole, been a very disappointing season. But at least we can kind of go to bed tonight and have some legitimate hope, some thoughts. Hey, maybe this is the year Indiana can make a run. Maybe Indiana can beat Wisconsin. And it's just kind of nice to have that feeling again. So soak this up. Enjoy it for tonight. Obviously, if Indiana can play again like this and we get another win, we'll do it all again tomorrow and enjoy that too. But just enjoy a really nice win for your Indiana Hoosiers where they really played to their potential. They played as a team. They looked good. They looked together. They communicated. I mean, all the things that we've been wanting to see, they did. And it's so rewarding to watch the team like that. And that's been the biggest disappointment of this year is all of us believing that this was in that team. It's not like we're all just like, well, this team stinks and we can't do anything. We're disappointed because that's all we were seeing. But we knew that there was more in there, and we finally saw it tonight. And whether it's just, something about Washington, D.C. and getting away from home or guys getting healthy or just, look, sometimes the random variance of shooting. And Indiana had some bad shooting nights, and they're stacking some good ones together here late. Whatever it is, a great performance, one that should have us all excited and certainly seems to. And let's do it again tomorrow. That's all we can say. All right, thanks for joining us on this episode of the Assembly Call IU Postgame Show. We will join you tomorrow immediately after Indiana, Wisconsin. That game begins at 6:30 Eastern Time, 5:30 Central Time. And, of course, in between now and then, we have another podcast episode that'll come in your feed and that you can listen to on the radio as we have another episode of Assembly Call Radio coming out tomorrow as well. So lots of content, lots of stuff to talk about, but it's so much more fun doing it after a 22-point victory than a loss. So we'll have fun, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.